Before we start, let me quickly just say that you can get the full Construct 3 source project and the full game by supporting me on my Patreon page. Hello and welcome to another episode of the devlog of Runes of Aereal. And today we'll be talking about a very important part of the game, a very important part of the logic, which is the command queue. Now, to give you an idea of what the command queue actually is and how it actually works, I'm going to start a battle first. And let's see.
Fight!
So if you start a battle, everything that happens inside the battle, everything you as a player do, or everything that an enemy does, is supposed to be sequenced. Because whenever you play a card, a lot of things happen. First, the card will be played, it will make some effect, it will be placed on the deck here. Next, the enemy will have an animation of some sort. If he is damaged, next the HUD will be updated and stuff like that. So those are all things that happen in sequence. If they were not to happen in sequence, then it would be a mess. Everything would happen at once and you as a user would be confused, and that's just not how these type of games, these card games actually work. These things happen in a sequence. And in order to make things more damage, let's for example more ideal or more handleable, I created a queuing system. Let me just show you what happens, for example, if I play this card. So you saw that it does some animation. The card has gone to the deck here. It's gotten fragile and stuff like that. And also the character here has done something. It's cast a spell. He has done an animation as well. So dropping that card, going to the deck, doing an animation for the character, doing an animation for the enemy, is all things that are scripted one after the other. And now you have to imagine that if you were to have to do that using events in the event sheet, that would become a mess very fast. Because you would have to, for example, start an animation and then check when animation is finished. And then depending on what happened before, choose what other animation to start, or what other tween to start, or what other sound effect to start, whatever. So if there's only one possibility, that'll go very fine and that'll be handleable. But in complex games like this one, there are a lot of possibilities, a lot of different cards, a lot of things that will be going on, a lot of different enemies with other effects. So in order to make that more easier, I created a system using a command queue where construct will go over each separate command, which is in a queue system, and make so that it is executed one by one in the correct order. And it will only execute the next command whenever it has to execute it, depending on what happened in the command before that. So that's a bit tricky to explain, but let me show you how exactly that works. So let's see here. The command queue, let's start with there are actually two event sheets which are very important here. This is the command queue and the command functions. And the command queue is actually the main thing. What happens here is this. This is the most important event in like the entire game, I think. Command queue is actually a dictionary, I believe. Let me just search for that. In the object types and under data, you can find the command queue. It's an array. And we check if the width of that array, meaning how many items are in the array right now, or if that's greater than 0, that means it has to do something. And if it's not already executing some command, then we execute the next command. That's it. And execute next command is here, this function which is here. The first thing that does is just setting a Boolean variable. It says, okay, right now I'm executing something. I'm not accepting any new commands. I'm doing something. And after the command is done, somehow, and that depends from command to command, that is really different in every situation, whenever the command is finished, this Boolean will be set to 0 again, and this will be called again, and the next command will be read into the queue. So what happens here is there is a JSON created on the fly. That is a JSON object called JSON, and it's just it's in here, and we parse the JSON from the front of the command queue. So that means that the command queue actually contains a JSON string, and then we parse that, and we set some global variables to be used here in next and other event sheets to know which the current UID, which is the current target, the current command, and the current context. What exactly that is also depends on the entire context. If we're playing a card, if we're playing a scroll, if we're whatever, and then these things will differ. And then we call a function from a function map, and that function map really maps a command which was given here from the JSON file into a function that really exists. And here you can see that function map. We're mapping the command C for command underscore nturn to fn nturn, which is actually a function here on the command functions. There's a lot of functions in here. I've collapsed them all. All of these functions are mapped to a string here C nturn. And all of these commands already get defined here. Those are global constants I've created to be able to easily create or call this function queue command, where I can queue the command which goes into the to the command queue actually. And at the moment that this execute next command is called, it's just popped from the command queue array and executed based on the function. We pop it from the queue and we add it to a history. So the history is very useful in that way that we can debug using it. It's not really useful in terms of user gameplay, but it's useful to be debugging. So if something goes wrong inside the logic, and we want to know exactly what commands were fired by the system, we can just open that in debug mode. And in the debugger, we can search for the command history array and see what's in the array at that moment, so that we can see exactly what commands were executed at what time. Actually, so that is actually what happens. And in order to put things in this command queue here, we have to execute the queue command. And then there are 4 parameters to the queue command. We say, okay, this is the command you have to execute with this UID, and that UID is variable. That can be a card, can be a scroll. The target is usually the UID of an enemy, and the context can be anything actually. That's a parameter, a string parameter that can be passed to give some parameter to the function to be called. So it's actually very very generic. We can use that in a number of different ways. So that's it. Every command function here does really something. We'll be coming back to the different command functions and how they work in later videos. But let me just show you a small example. Here, for example, at the start of a battle, this function is called. We'll see in a later video how a battle sequence actually works. But you can see it in here that already, for example, queue command is being called. Queue command is being called with the command called C show message. Yeah. And then there's no UID, no target, but there is some kind of context that will be used in show message. So that's what's happening here. Also, the next thing what's happening is we call next turn. So as we are issuing the command show message next just before next turn, what will happen is the system will show a message first. And whenever we deem that message to be complete, whenever we set that variable called executing back to 0, the next command will be fired, and that next command will be next turn, because the next thing we did here is queue that command. At the same time, we initialize some music, we play some sound, and stuff like that. So that's actually what happens. The most important things that need to go in sequence from one another are queued using a queue command. So they're not explicitly called using a function. So that's not really explicitly at that time you call tween for an x and a y coordinate or an opacity, or you start some animation, anything, or you launch some particle effects. No, those things are queued, and it's only when we deem them as complete the next queue can start. The next command in the queue can start. So as the last thing in this video, I'll show you now if we start another battle, and we'll start this battle in the bug layout. And the battle will automatically start. And already we are passing some parameters to that queue. So let me search for command queue. Command queue. Now there's nothing in the queue because nothing is happening. But watch what whenever I do something, stuff was added to the queue and immediately it went out of the queue because that function checking for the queue automatization is working. And if you now check for the command history, you can see that all of those commands were executed. Spawn enemies was done, a message was shown, a card was drawn, a determine strategy was done, a draw card, another draw card, etc. So that's actually what's going to happen in the command queue. This is a very important logic in the game. It's important that you understand how it works because it's being used like everywhere. So that's it. I hope you liked it. As always, please like, please subscribe, and if you want the full code for this game, please support me on my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Bye bye.